بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So as discussed last week, inshallah, today we're going to be talking about the life of Imam Al-Tabari. And the reason why we've decided to talk about the biography of Imam Al-Tabari is basically because our tafsir classes are all dependent on, first of all, the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and by the permission of Allah we're able to do these classes, and also because of the efforts and the blood, sweat and tears that the scholars of the past actually gave for the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His book. And one of the main scholars and one of the first scholars, and we will discuss this as well, one of the first scholars of tafsir and writing the tafsir of the Quran was Imam Al-Tabari. And one of the first books of tafsir was Imam Al-Tabari. So because, the science of tafsir is basically built upon these giants, built upon these scholars, I thought it's important to discuss and talk about their lives and what they went through and the efforts that they went through and the things that happened in their lives and inspiring stories from their lives, so that we can gain benefit and really have a more deeper appreciation of the tafsir classes that we do and where they come from. So, inshallah, we'll be talking about Imam Al-Tabari. And unlike, when we talk about the prophets, when we talk about the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, when we talk about the companions, these Muslim figures in history, there's a lot of information out there. And we always hear about this information in our talks, in general talks, lectures, khutbahs, programs, seminars. So, you get a lot of information about these people, these monumental, righteous people of the past. But with these types of scholars, you don't hear that much. There's not that much out there in terms of content with regards to these scholars. So you know about, for example, Tafsir Al-Tabari. Okay, maybe you know that he was from the beginning of, from the early scholars of Islam. But other than this, you don't really know that much about them. So when you do research, I was doing research, it took a lot longer than it did if I did Seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, or lives of the companions or something like this, because obviously it's something that you're not used to, you don't know that much about them anyway. So it's interesting when you read about their lives, and you get a lot of interesting facts and figures and stories, and this is what we're going to be mentioning today, inshallah. Imam Al-Tabari, one of the scholars, he was talking about Imam Al-Tabari, and he said that he is Ra'sul Mufassirin, the head of those who did tafsir, because he was one of the first who did tafsir. Another scholar said that he was Sheikh al-Mufassirin, the Sheikh of the Mufassirun, from those who did the tafsir. And Imam Al-Tabari, he's known as Imam Al-Tabari, but Tabari isn't actually his name, but it's a laqab. It was a nickname that he was given. His real name was Muhammad ibn Jarir. Muhammad ibn Jarir, ibn Yazid, ibn Kathir, ibn Ghalib. And his kunya was Abu Ja'far. And he never ever married. So he never had a child called Ja'far, but it was from the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ that people were given kunyas, even those who had never married. For example, Aisha radiallahu anha, she was known as what? Abu Abdullah. Abu Abdullah, even though she never married after the Prophet ﷺ. But she had a kunya because this was the tradition of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ and the tradition of the companions. So his name was Muhammad ibn Jarir. And he was born in Tabaristan, which is where he gets the laqab and the nickname Al-Tabari. For example, Sheikh Al-Albani was from Albania. Likewise, Imam Al-Tabari, he was born in Tabaristan. And Tabaristan today, it's situated in northern Iran, south of the Caspian Sea. So you've got the Caspian Sea, south of the Caspian Sea, on the shores of the Caspian Sea, in the south, under the Caspian Sea, you have the birthplace of Imam Al-Tabari in a city called Amul. And scholars, they say that he was born in 224 Hijri or 225 Hijri. So there's a difference with regards to when exactly he was born, either 224 Hijri or 225 Hijri. And one of his students actually mentions the reason why there's this difference. And he said that Imam Al-Tabari himself talked about why there was a difference with regards to when he was born, why he wasn't sure in which year he was born. And he said because in those days people used to record history with events. So they used to remember certain times and certain dates and certain periods of history with things that happened in those times. Like, for example, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when he was born, Amul Fil, it was known as the year of the elephant. They never had no numbers to distinguish between the different years. So he said that in those days, they used to record history with events and not with specific numbers or with years. So he said an event took place when I was born, and later people differed with regards to when this event actually took place. So some said it was in 224 Hijri, and some said it was 225 Hijri, so they differed with regards to when exactly he was born. But it was around that time, 224 or 225 Hijri. And they say that in terms of the way he looked, he was someone of a brownish complexion. Okay, so he had a brown skin color, and he was thin and he was tall. And he was very well spoken, to the extent that when he would speak with perfect Arabic grammar. And he wouldn't speak, as they say, Ami, the informal Arabic language that people speak on the streets, but he would speak with perfect Arabic, Quranic Arabic, with the proper grammar, and he would never, sacrifice his language and lower the quality of the Arabic that he would speak. And he had black hair and he had a black beard. And this remained up until he died. This remained, didn't remain. So this remained up until he died, okay, and he died when he was 86 years old. So he was 86 years old. Is this going to work, or is it from the back? Can someone just check if Asghar is in the audio rooms? Find out. I don't know if it's working. Yeah, it's working, it's fine. Okay, so we were saying that he had black hair and he had a black beard up until he passed away. He didn't pass away when he was young. He was 86 years old when he actually passed away. So subhanAllah, he had a gift of looking, mashallah, very young, having no white hair, even until he was very old. And there's a story that's mentioned with regards to his father. His father, when Imam Al-Tabari was very young, his father had a dream about his son. The father of Imam Al-Tabari, he had a dream that he saw his son in front of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he had with him a satchel, a bag, and in the bag there were stones, and he was throwing the stones as if he was protecting the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the father, he went and he interpreted the dream, or he got the dream interpreted from a scholar, and the scholar said to him that your son, when he's older, he's going to advise the people on the religion of Allah and on the Sharia. And so the father, he was keen after this to help Imam Al-Tabari and take him and, basically just devote him into the path of knowledge from a young age. And this is why you see his early life, okay, and the things that he accomplished, okay, he accomplished at a very early age. First of all, he was taught the basics of Islam, the fundamentals of Islam. He was taught the principles, and he was taught the Islamic etiquette by his own parents in his home. Okay, which shows you that the first teachers are the parents. And the first madrasa is the actual house. The house that you're brought up in. Okay, so sometimes we tend to, send our kids to madrasa, okay, and we think that the kids, the madrasa will do everything. It doesn't matter what happens at home. But the house is the first madrasa. It's the first institute, Islamic institute of the child. So whatever they see and whatever they hear and whatever they do in the home is going to stay with them forever. And whatever you teach them as parents, because you're the first teachers that they'll have. So this shows that Imam Al-Tabari, he had parents who were very aware of this. And they knew that in order for him to achieve his potential, they had to do whatever they could first of all, in terms of teaching him and raising him in a good Islamic environment, teaching him the basics, and teaching him the correct Islamic etiquette. So the first school that he had was the home. After this, he was sent to Masjid and Ma'ahid al-Quran, or Islamic or Quranic institutes, to learn the Quran. And he memorized the Quran by the age of 7 years old. So 7 years old, he memorized the whole of the Quran. And he perfected the recitation of the Quran and learned the rulings related to the Quran as well, at the age of 7 years old. And he led the people in prayer, okay, as an Imam. He was an Imam by the age of 8 years old. So he's hafidh the Quran by 7. He's led the people, in Salah by the age of 8. And sometimes, a person who's 40, 50, he's scared, doesn't want to lead the people in prayer. He's afraid. He's nervous. But he's 8 years old, mashallah, and he's leading the people in prayer. And then he started to learn the books of hadith by the age of 9. So you can see straight away he's got this memory and this thirst for knowledge and this ability that, subhanAllah, not everyone's given. It's a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he was recognized to have a very sharp and keen mind from an early age. And his father took advantage of this. So he used to send him to as many places as he could to, for him to learn, for him to benefit, because he was like a sponge. Especially when you're young, you're like a sponge. That's why they say, al-hifdhu fi istighari kan-naqshu al-hajari. Memorization at a young age is like engraving on a stone. It never goes away, because you learn it from a young age. So he learned all of this Islamic knowledge. He memorized the Quran. He was memorizing a hadith from a very young age. And at the age of 12, he took the next step of seeking knowledge. So he left his city where he came from. Where was he born? What was the name of the city? Tabaristan was Amul. So Amul was the city where he was born. Tabaristan was the country at the time. So he left the city of Amul and he started to travel in pursuit of knowledge. And he traveled in and around Tabaristan, and he also went to a place called Ar-Ray, which is in Persia or Iran. And Imam Al-Tabari, he talks about his experiences in seeking knowledge. And he said, me and some of my friends, some of my companions, we used to learn from different scholars. And he said at one point, we were learning from someone by the name of Muhammad al-Razi, one of his teachers. And he said, we would learn from Muhammad al-Razi, and sometimes he would come to us to see what we had learned from him, to test us and to revise, what we had learned from him. And then he would say, we would go to another scholar by the name of Ahmad al-Dulabi. And he used to be a distance away. So he used to come sometimes we used to go to Muhammad al-Razi, and then we used to go to Ahmad al-Dulabi, who was a distance away. So they were traveling everywhere. And he said we used to go to Ahmad al-Dulabi, who was a distance away, and then he said we used to go kal-majaneen. We used to go like madmen and rush to Ibn Humayd's circle to make sure we attend his on time. So they were going, to benefit from different scholars, in different parts of the city or of the area, and they would rush, like madmen, as he said, kal-majaneen. They would rush from one place to another to benefit from the knowledge of the scholars who were in the area. And then he traveled to many places in search of knowledge. He went to Iraq with the intention, of meeting Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal was around at that time. So he went to Iraq, at the age of, in year 241. So he was, how old? 16? Around 16 years old. So he went at the age of 16 to Iraq to meet Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. But when he arrived, just after he had arrived, or just before he had arrived, Imam Ahmad had passed away. Because Imam Ahmad passed away in the year 241 Hijri, subhanAllah. So he never got to meet Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, but there were many other scholars in Iraq, and he benefited from them. He traveled to Basra in Iraq. He went to Kufa to seek knowledge, and it said that he learned 100,000 ahadith in Basra. When he went to Basra, he memorized and he learned 100,000 hadith. And when we talk about hadith, we don't say just the body, the text of the actual hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, but we're talking about the chain of narration as well, going back to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, and also the strength of its chain, how strong the hadith is as well. So he's learning these 100,000 hadith just from one specific area in Basra itself. And then he traveled to Sham, into Syria, and he went to Damascus, and also he went to Egypt, where he studied the fiqh of Imam Malik. So you can see he's traveling wherever he can to benefit as much as he can in his early age, as early as he can. And there's a story mentioned about Imam Al-Tabari when he was traveling. It said that once Imam Al-Tabari and some of the other scholars who were with him, and all their names were Muhammad. So his name was Muhammad ibn Jarir Al-Tabari, and there were other scholars, whose names were Muhammad as well. One of them was Ibn Khuzaymah, Muhammad ibn Ishaq ibn Khuzaymah, famous scholar. So he was around at the same time. So this story mentions that these scholars, they were traveling together in search of knowledge, and they were in Egypt seeking knowledge. And they used up all the money that they had. So they never had no more money left. And because of this, they became hungry. And they couldn't eat because they had no money. And so because they were hungry and they had no food, okay, no money to buy food, they became weak as a result. Okay, so now they're thinking, what are they going to do? They've got no money left. So eventually they agreed, they said, let's draw lots. And whoever gets the shortest straw, they have to ask the neighbors for food. Because they don't want to ask anybody. They want to be self-sufficient. Okay, they don't want to have to go to the stoop to the level, but they have to ask others for food and for money and so on and so forth. So Muhammad ibn Khuzaymah, he got the shortest straw. So he said, let me perform wudu and pray before I go and ask the neighbors for food. So they said, okay. So he went, he performed wudu, and while he was praying, there was a knock on the door. And they opened the door, and it was a government official who came. And this government official, he said, where is Sheikh such and such? Muhammad ibn such and such. Okay, one of the scholars. And he said, I'm here. So he took a bag full of dinars, 50 dinars, and he gave it to the scholar. And then he said, where's such and such? And he came forward and he gave him 50 dinars, the same amount. And then he said, where's Muhammad ibn Jarir al-Tabari? And al-Tabari came forward, he said, I'm Tabari, and he gave him 50 dinar, a bag of 50 dinar. And he kept asking until everyone had been given 50 dinar. And then he said, where's Ibn Khuzaymah? And I said, Ibn Khuzaymah, he's praying. Okay, he's praying. And, when he finished praying, he came and he was given the same amount. And then the government official, he said that the leader, the Amir, okay, the leader of the Muslim Ummah at the time, he said the leader had a dream last night, and in the dream, he said that the Mahamid were becoming weak due to hunger. In al-Mahamida, verily the Mahamid, the Muhammads are becoming weak. The Muhammads are becoming weak due to hunger. So give them these bundles of gold, and if you run out, then inform me and I will replenish you, basically. I'll refill your stock. SubhanAllah. So he had a dream. Okay, in the dream, he was told, okay, this was from, good dreams are from Allah, true dreams are from Allah. So he was given a dream by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling him that these scholars were actually short of food and short of drink, and they were weak. So he gave them money for them to be able to look after themselves and feed themselves. Imam Al-Tabari, finally he settled in the city of Baghdad at the age of 65 years old. So from 12 years old up until 65 years old, he was basically traveling in pursuit of knowledge. So he spent most of his life seeking knowledge. And this shows you're never too old to learn. At the age of 40, 50, 60 years old, he's still traveling to different places, learning from the scholars. And this is the tradition of the scholars. This is what scholars do. So even if you're of an old age, you still learn from people, even if they're younger than you. And this is the case with many of the scholars. Even Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, had said that when he would learn, sometimes he would learn from people who were younger than him. And he was older. He was much older than them, but he will still study from them. So this is from the humility of the one who wants to seek knowledge. Okay, because it's not about who specifically you're learning from, but it's about the knowledge that they have. You're learning the knowledge that they've been given. Okay, not specifically who he is, or how old he is, or how he looks, or what country he comes from. Okay, but it's about the knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed that person with. And this is why Imam Al-Tabari, he traveled up until he was 65 years old in pursuit of knowledge, and then he finally settled in Baghdad. And when he finally settled in Baghdad, that's when he started to write. And that's when he started to teach, basically. Okay, so he spent the rest of his life writing, and he spent the rest of his life teaching. And the scholars and historians, they say that he spent basically 40 years of his life. Okay, each day he would write 40 pages worth of knowledge, worth of Islamic knowledge in the different sciences. And they said this meant that he wrote altogether 600,000 pages in his lifetime. So he wrote 600,000 pages in his lifetime. And there's a story which is mentioned when he was writing his tafsir. He was writing his tafsir, his famous tafsir, and he finished his tafsir, and he went to his friends to help him write copies of his tafsir, because in those days, you couldn't just print it out. In those days, somebody had to actually sit there and write out the whole tafsir again. So he went to his friends and he said, look, I need help in copying this tafsir? Can you copy this tafsir for me? So they asked him, they said, how big is it? How many pages? And he said 30,000 pages. So his tafsir was actually 30,000 pages long. So they said to him, this will take a lifetime to do. It's like, it's going to take our whole lives to do this. This is too long. So he went back and he summarized it into 3,000 pages. SubhanAllah. So from 30,000 pages, it went down to 3,000 pages, and then they copied it. And then the same thing happened with his book, Tarikh al-Tabari, which is book on history. Okay, he went to them and he said, can you copy the book? And they said, how many pages? He said the same amount, 30,000 pages. And they said, this is going to take a lifetime, we can't do this. So he went back and he summarized it again into 3,000 pages, and then they copied it for him. And when this happened, he said, ماتت الهمم. He said that people's determination has weakened. And people aren't making as much effort anymore. These guys are useless basically, they're not even copying this. What's going on? So subhanAllah, it shows you how determined he was and how much effort he made in compiling these books, which are still used today, they're still around today, subhanAllah, from that time. And you can imagine the efforts that he went through. Imam Al-Tabari, the scholars, they mention, and his students themselves, they mention that he had the best etiquette and the best manners. And even with his students, he would have the best manners, and he would always be concerned for his students. It said that one of the students, he said, some of the students of Imam Al-Tabari would rub me the wrong way. Okay, so one of the students, he said, I used to go to his circles, and some of the students, they used to rub me the wrong way. So I stopped going to the circles of Imam Al-Tabari. And he said that I stopped attending for a while, and Imam Al-Tabari came to me, and he apologized himself. So Imam Al-Tabari, the Sheikh himself, is coming to his student and he's apologizing. He's apologizing, he's asking that, he's forgiven. And the student, he said that he kept on apologizing, he kept coming to me, kept on apologizing until I thought he was going mad. That's how much he was coming to me, that's how much he was apologizing to me. And he said, until I started to attend his class again. SubhanAllah, so the effect that it had on him, okay, that the Sheikh himself is coming and apologizing, he realized this isn't someone who is your usual teacher, your usual ustad. This is someone special. So he went back and he started to attend his class again. And also it said that whenever he would teach a book, whenever he would go through a book, if one of his students was absent, then he wouldn't teach that book on that day or at that moment in time. He would wait for all the students to be there, okay, his students, and then he would teach that book so that all the students would benefit and none of the students would actually miss out. SubhanAllah. So this shows you the deep concern that he had. Nowadays someone teaches a subject in school or even an Islamic subject, okay, and if someone's not there, a person still teaches, doesn't care. It's their loss. So SubhanAllah shows you the concern and the love that he had for his own students. And some of the scholars, and in fact Imam al-Dhahabi, he mentions that he says he was thiqa. He was someone who was reliable, and kana sadiqan. He was someone who was trustworthy. And Imam al-Dhahabi also mentions something else, and he says, kana lahu tashayyu' la tadur. He had some Shia tendencies which were harmless. Now when we talk about Shia tendencies, we don't mean that he had hatred for the companions of the Messenger of Allah, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, Umar radiallahu anh, and so on and so forth. Okay, but in those days, okay, and even today, there's different levels of tashayyu'. And they said that Imam Al-Tabari, he had a love for Ali radiallahu anh and the household of the Messenger of Allah, not a hatred for the other companions. Okay, and what happened was there was some jealousy amongst some of the scholars and his contemporaries at the time, and they tried to use and throw these accusations at Imam Al-Tabari rahimahullah. And Imam Al-Dhahabi himself, he mentions in his tarikh, in his history and his seer of the scholars of the past, he says that he was accused of having some Shia tendencies. So in another section he also mentions the same author, Imam Al-Dhahabi. He says that he was accused of having some tashayyu', some Shia tendencies, but we haven't seen anything except good from him. Some said he allowed wiping over the socks in wudu without washing them, but there is no basis for this. Okay, so you can see that there's some kind of jealousy, and this is always the case with the scholars. With the big scholars of Islam, there's always scholars who try to, say stuff and taint the reputation of their contemporaries and of the scholars of that time. Imam Bukhari, Sheikh al-Islam bin Taymiyyah, the four Imams, rahimahumullah, they all had situations where there was a lot of competitiveness and there was a lot of jealousy from the other scholars of that time. And this is why the scholars, they say that there's no jealousy like the jealousy of a student of knowledge. The jealousy that a student of knowledge feels is unlike any other jealousy that anybody else would feel. SubhanAllah. So it's something which is real and it's something that happens as we can see. And also, they say one of the reasons of this was because he had written a book on the virtues of Ali radiallahu anhu. So just because you write a book on the virtues of Ali radiallahu anhu doesn't mean you have something against all the other companions. Okay, it's like if I write a book on Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, doesn't mean I have a problem with other companions now. So this shows you that there was some kind of jealousy amongst some of the people during his time. Also, what proves that he didn't have these Shia tendencies was the fact that he refuted the Rawafid. He refuted the Shias themselves. And he wrote books talking about the virtues of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu and Umar radiallahu anhu as well. So again, this shows you that there's no basis for these accusations. And this happened, he wrote these books, the virtues of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu and the virtues of Umar radiallahu anhu, when he heard that more people were cursing the companions of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his hometown, in Tabaristan. And so he wrote these books on the virtues of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu and Umar radiallahu anhuma. And the leader of Tabaristan, when he heard that Imam Al-Tabari had written a book about these leaders, he was someone who would curse the companions. So he ordered that Imam Al-Tabari be brought so that he could be punished. One of the people who was in the presence of this leader was a sympathizer of Imam Al-Tabari. So he went to Imam Al-Tabari and he informed Imam Al-Tabari that if you don't leave, you're going to be caught and you're going to be whipped, you're going to be punished. Because this is what the leader is saying. So Imam Al-Tabari, he managed to flee. And the man who told him, the man who informed him, he was caught. And they found out he was the one who actually told Imam Al-Tabari about what the leader would have done. So he ended up being whipped as a result. He ended up being punished as a result. And it said that years later, many years later, they were reunited. Him, Imam Al-Tabari, and the one who had helped him, the one who had informed him, and the one who had advised him to leave the area. And it said that Imam Al-Tabari showed him an immense amount of respect. Showed him lots of love, showed him lots of respect because of what he had done for him in those days. Also, Imam Al-Tabari, it said that he would memorize poetry. He had love for poetry and he would memorize poetry, Islamic poetry, and also poetry from Jahiliyyah, from before Islam. Okay, so he would memorize Islamic poetry and also poetry from Jahiliyyah. And one of the scholars, he praised Imam Al-Tabari rahimahullah, and he said, with regards to his knowledge and with regards to how much he had memorized and how much he had learnt, he said, by Allah, I think Imam Al-Tabari has forgotten in his whole lifetime knowledge which another person would learn in his whole lifetime. So the amount that Imam Al-Tabari has forgotten, okay, by the end of his life, is the same amount of knowledge that another person would learn in his whole lifetime. That's how much he's actually just forgotten, not what he's actually memorized and what he's learnt over his whole life, subhanAllah. So it shows you the immense amount that Imam Al-Tabari had actually memorized, had actually learnt. And the scholars and the students of Imam Al-Tabari, they would say he had the best etiquette when he would eat. And he had the best etiquette with himself. He would always keep himself presentable, looking good, looking clean. He would be hygienic. And they said he would have the best etiquette and they would love to eat with him, just to see how his etiquette was when he would eat. They would say that he would protect his beard with his left hand while he would eat with his right hand, so that there wouldn't be any food or oil clinging to his beard while eating. So he would be very careful about eating, in a clean manner, to such an extent that he would cover his beard with his left hand. And he would always eat from the side of the plate. He wouldn't just put his hands in the middle of the plate, but he would eat from the sides of the plate. And this is from the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The fact that a person should eat, as the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, لا تأكلوا من وسط الطعام وكلوا من حافتيه. Don't eat from the middle of the plate, but eat from the sides of the plate. So this is from the etiquette that a person should have. And also they said you would never hear him spit, or take out phlegm from his throat and spit it out. You would never hear him do anything like this. And also from his etiquette and from his adab with people was that he would always refuse to take any financial support, even from the leaders and from the rulers. So once he said he was asked by the leader to write a book on fiqh, a basic text on fiqh. So he wrote a book on fiqh, which he wrote, and Imam Al-Tabari, by the way, he wasn't just a scholar of tafsir. Okay, as we mentioned before, he studied fiqh, he studied Arabic language, Arabic grammar, he studied hadith. So he was an all-round scholar. Okay, and even if you look at his book, which we'll talk about, he mentions all different sciences of Islam, not just specifically tafsir. So he wrote this book on fiqh, and he sent it to the leader, who in return, just as a reward, okay, he gave him, a wage, if you like, for him writing this book. He gave him 1,000 dinar. And Imam Al-Tabari refused to take it. And they told him, just take it and give it in charity. So just take the money, but just give it in charity. You don't have to use it for yourself. And he still refused. He said, no, I don't want the money. And once he was gifted 3,000 dinar. Once he was gifted 3,000 dinar, which he again refused. And the man who donated and gave him the money, or tried to give him the money, he said that I want to do this as a means to gain nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why I'm doing it. But still, Imam Al-Tabari refused. So I'm not going to take this money. Okay, because he thought if I take this money, then sometimes a person's intention can change. And he might be doing things, okay, for other than the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. So he still refused. He would only accept money if he was able to pay it back and return it in the future. So if it was a small amount, then he would take it because he would know that he would be able to pay it back in the future. Once one of the leaders, he gave him a pomegranate. Okay, just in passing, he maybe met him or he sat with him. He gave him a pomegranate, and when he took the pomegranate, he distributed it amongst his neighbors and the people that he knew. Okay, so even though it was a small fruit, he gave it to the people that were close to him, his neighbors. And later on, the leader gifted him with 10,000 dirham, which is a lot of money. 10,000 pounds is a lot of money. Okay, so 10,000 dirham, he's been given this by the leader. And Imam Al-Tabari, he refused. And he said to the leader, he said, we accepted your pomegranate, but we're not going to accept this 10,000 dirham. And the messenger said, the one who brought the money, he said, I was told that if you say this, that I should tell you to take the money and distribute it among your students. So he's been told by the leader. He said, look, if he says, I'm not going to take the money, then tell him to take the money and give it to your students instead. Don't keep it for yourself, give it to your students. So Imam Al-Tabari, he said, the leader, the Amir, he knows better who is most in need than myself. So there's no point in me giving it to my students, because the Amir, the leader, is more knowledgeable than me with regards to who needs it more. Okay, so he's kind of a bit of flattery, with regards to the leader at the time as well. Okay, so he gave back that money, and also he received some money later that he was owed, and he sent 40 dinar to the leader. Why did he send 40 dinar to the leader? For the pomegranate. So he sent him 40 dinar, okay, which was for the pomegranate. SubhanAllah, so this shows you, how careful he was, that if somebody ever gave him something, he would always give him back. He would always return the favor, subhanAllah. This is from the etiquettes of a Muslim, that when someone does you a favor, you should do a favor for them in kind. Okay, this is from the etiquettes of a Muslim. And Imam Al-Tabari, he never got married. As we mentioned, his kunya was Abu Ja'far, but he never ever got married. And, the scholars say there's no, specific reason in terms of, there was nothing wrong with his health. Okay, there was no problem with him that he couldn't get married. But they say because he was so busy in his pursuit of knowledge, he just never had time to get married. He never had time. And, the scholars, they talk about, if a person is afraid that he's going to fall into haram, then in this situation, it's wajib for him to get married. So Imam Al-Tabari never got married. Doesn't mean that we don't have to get married now. Okay? Because every person's situation is different. So Imam Al-Tabari, for example, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, Imam Al-Nawawi rahimahullah, Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, all these scholars never got married. Okay? Because there was no need for them to get married, because they were so preoccupied and so busy in the pursuit of knowledge. Okay? But as I mentioned, everyone is different. Okay? The Messenger of Allah himself got married. Okay? And other people got married, other scholars of the past. So it depends on a person's situation. If a person is afraid that he's going to fall into haram, or he feels like he needs to get married, then it becomes incumbent upon him to get married. So, as we mentioned, he never got married because he was so busy in the pursuit of knowledge. As we've seen, he was traveling in pursuit of knowledge until he was 65 years old. So he never had time. He never had time to get married. He was traveling so much, he eventually settled down when he was 65 years old. And he was a scholar not just of tafsir, but he was a scholar of hadith, he was a scholar of fiqh, the Quranic sciences in general. He was a scholar of history. He was a historian. He was a linguist. He was a scholar of Aqeedah itself. So he was upon the Aqeedah of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And he, as we mentioned, he lived in Baghdad for the rest of his life. And he died when he was 86 years old. And he died in Baghdad, which was a center of Islamic knowledge and the capital of Islamic knowledge. And many scholars came from the city of Baghdad. And he died in the month of Shawwal, the 26th of Shawwal, in 310 Hijri, which corresponds to 923 of the Gregorian calendar. So, he lived a very full life. He died at the age of 86 years old. When he passed away, people from all over Baghdad, they came to his funeral. From all over Baghdad. Imagine if you passed away, everyone from Birmingham comes just to pray your janazah prayer, subhanAllah. That's the respect that they had for Imam Al-Tabari. Everyone from all over Baghdad came to his funeral. His funeral prayer took place at his house. And the people stayed behind after he was buried in the cemetery. They stayed behind even after he had been buried, because of the respect that they had for the Imam. And because they felt the pain over the loss of such a great scholar, subhanAllah, that they stayed, just thinking about all that he's done for the sake of Islam. And it's said that when he passed away, his students went to his house to gather all of his writings, to gather all the material, everything that he wrote. And they found that for each day of his life, there was the equivalent of 14 pages. So it was like as if he was writing 14 pages from the beginning, from the time he was born, to the time he died. There was that much paper, in his house. That's how much he had written, subhanAllah. This is no surprise, considering that, his tafsir was 30,000 pages. His book on history was 30,000 pages as well. So this is the life of Imam Al-Tabari rahimahullah. And I want to spend another 15 minutes talking about two of his books, but primarily talking about his tafsir, because his tafsir is one of the books that I always use when I do my tafsir classes. Without fail, it's one of the main books out of a few books that I always use. Ibn Kathir being the other, and Imam Sa'di rahimahullah, his tafsir being another, and some others. But his book, because it's one of the oldest books, and every other book of tafsir depends on his book, I thought it would be good to talk about his book of tafsir. It's known by most people as Tafsir al-Tabari, the tafsir of al-Tabari. But the actual name of his book is Jami'ul Bayan عن تأويل آية القرآن. جامع البيان عن تأويل آية القرآن. A collection of statements interpreting the ayat of the Quran. So this is basically the name of his book, but it's known as Tafsir al-Tabari. And there's difference with regards to the meanings of ta'wil and tafsir. But Imam al-Tabari, he would say that tafsir and ta'wil have the same meaning, which is basically to explain, to expound, or to interpret a meaning of something. So he would say that ta'wil and tafsir have the same meaning. And from the things which are unique to this book, to Tafsir al-Tabari, is first of all, we can say it's the oldest and most comprehensive book of tafsir. There's no other book, which is as old as Tafsir al-Tabari. And it's the first book of tafsir, that was compiled. And when he compiled it, he compiled it from the books of tafsir of the companions of the past who had written okay, something about some of the ayat, and they explain some of the ayat of the Quran. So for example, Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, he had a compilation of ayat which he had explained. He had done tafsir of them. Sa'id ibn Jubair, Mujahid, Hassan al-Basri, Ikrimah, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. So these people, they had compilations, okay, which had been recorded of their statements and their narrations of some of the ayat of the Quran. So he compiled all of these into his own book, into his Tafsir al-Tabari. And from the books also that he compiled from were the books of the Tabi'in, such as Sufyan ibn Uyayna and Shu'bah and Waqi'. Waqi' was the teacher of Imam al-Shafi'i, and the famous poem, Shakawtu ila waqi'in su'a hifdhi. I complained to my teacher Waqi' about my poor hifdh. So this Waqi' is the same Waqi' who was a teacher of Imam al-Shafi'i. And Abdul Razzaq, who was another scholar, and there's a famous book called Musannaf ibn Abdul Razzaq, or Musannaf Abdul Razzaq, which is his book. And Abu Bakr ibn Abi Shayba also had a book which talked about the tafsir of the Quran. And he also has a book called Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba, which some of you may have heard. So he basically took all of these narrations, all of these compilations of all these narrations of these people, which consisted of the tafsir of the Quran, and he compiled it all into one book. He compiled it into the tafsir of Jami'ul Bayan. And he wrote it from 283 to 290 Hijri. So it took him, 7 years to compile this book. And this book, it doesn't just have tafsir in it, okay? But as I said, he was a scholar of many Islamic sciences. He was a scholar of grammar. He was a scholar of hadith. He was a scholar of, history, scholar of seerah, comparative fiqh. So all of these different sciences he would also include in his tafsir. So he has all of these different sciences included. So for example, if he comes across an ayah talking about, rulings relating to fiqh, salah or zakah or fasting or marriage or divorce, something like this, he would go into some detail about the fiqh issues relating to those ayat. And also history and seerah. Surah Al-Fil, for example, the story of the elephant, he actually talks about the story of the elephant when he talks about this surah, in the tafsir of this surah. And the scholars, they talked about this book and they praised this book. Ibn Khuzaymah, who was Ibn Khuzaymah again? You can remind me. Who was Ibn Khuzaymah? The scholar who? Helped him? No, but did help him escape. He accompanied him when they went to Egypt to seek knowledge, and he was praying. He drew the shortest straw, and he was praying, and then the man came giving the gold from the Amir. So Imam Ibn Khuzaymah, he said, I have read this book from beginning to end, and don't know of anyone else on the face of this earth more knowledgeable than Tabari. So this is how much praise he gave Imam al-Tabari rahimahullah. Imam al-Nawawi, he said, لَمْ يُصَنِّفْ أَحَدٌ مِثْلَهُ. He said, nobody else has written anything like this. There's nobody else who has written anything similar to this. Another person, he said, another scholar, he said, if someone had to travel all the way to China to get this book, it wouldn't be a big task. It wouldn't be a big deal. Okay, it wouldn't be a big journey that he would have to make. It's not that big of a deal, because you're getting the tafsir of Imam al-Tabari rahimahullah. So it shows you, okay, the status that this book had amongst the scholars themselves. The book itself, when it was written and when it was copied and published and it spread amongst the whole of the Muslim world. And it spread to such an extent that it was known, it was popular, until the European colonial era, okay, which was a couple of hundred years ago. They said that when the colonial era started, okay, they would come and they would take, for whatever reason, sometimes they would steal, sometimes they would buy, old, traditional Islamic literature, okay, for artistic and historical purposes. Like, for example, the Quran, the Quranic manuscript that they have in Birmingham University. People would go and they would take these manuscripts because of its historical value. And because of this, copies of the book began to decline. And some said that the numbers were so low that it was as if the book had been lost completely. So there was a time when you wouldn't see it in the bookstores. It was just something that people would talk about. The book of Imam, the tafsir of Imam Al-Tabari. Okay, that's how much it had been basically gone. It was basically more or less, it had disappeared from bookstores. And up until the late, you could say late 19th century, the late 1800s, right at the end of the late 1800s, just before the beginning of the 20th century, 3 copies were found. 3 copies of Imam Tafsir al-Tabari were found. One in Najd, which is the eastern part of Saudi Arabia. Another which was published in Egypt. Okay, another copy which was published in Egypt. And a third copy which was found in Aleppo, which was in Syria. So these 3 copies were found and they were republished again. The first one in 1321 Hijri, which is 1903. So, you could say that the tafsir of Imam al-Tabari had been lost, okay? But, some say it was still around. But you couldn't find it in the bookstores. There were rare copies here and there. Okay, and this is why it said that there were 3 copies which were found later. So it hadn't completely gone, but it was close to completely disappearing. But then, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, 3 copies were found and it was republished in the early 20th century once again. And in his tafsir, Imam al-Tabari, he mentions ayat, and then he mentions, after he mentions the ayat, he mentions the saying of the companions, what the companions said about the ayah, what the tabi'een said about the ayat, and then what the salaf after them said about those specific ayat. And then after this, he would mention other narrations, starting with the strongest and leaving the weakest till the end. And this is why sometimes when you come across Tafsir al-Tabari, there won't be any ahadith or any narrations from the companions or from the tabi'een, because there were none. For that specific ayah, there weren't any. So instead, okay, he would put the strongest thing for that ayah, which might have been the weakest narration from, for example, the Israeliyat, for example. So he would always have things in order. So he would always put the strongest things first, and then the weakest he would leave till the end. And if there was nothing for that specific ayah except the weakest things, then obviously those things would be pushed up, because there wasn't much on that specific ayah. So that's with regards to his tafsir. His other book, which I thought would be good to touch upon, was his book on history, which was known as Tarikh al-Umami wal-Muluk, the book of nations and kings. And it was known as Tarikh al-Tabari. So his tafsir was known as Tafsir al-Tabari. His book on Tarikh and history was known as Tarikh al-Tabari. And it starts from the beginning of time, from Adam alayhi salam, all the way until Imam al-Tabari's time. So he basically writes a history of the world, from the time of Adam alayhi salam all the way through, from Adam alayhi salam to the rest of the prophets of Allah, to the Messenger of Allah sallam and his seerah, to the Khulafa Rashidun and the other companions, and all the way to his time. Okay, so the companions' lives of the tabi'een, the tabi'een, and this is the first book in Islamic history. The first book which was written in Islamic history was the book of Imam al-Tabari. Okay, Tafsir Tarikh al-Tabari, Tarikh al-Umami wal-Muluk. And what's interesting is Ibn Kathir, okay, wrote a book on tafsir, and he wrote a book on Tarikh as well, a book on history. And he said that he took a lot from Imam al-Tabari. So his Tafsir Ibn Kathir, is actually primarily dependent on Tafsir al-Tabari, as well as the other books of Tafsir. The other books of Tafsir as well that came after, they're all dependent on Tafsir al-Tabari. Because he was the Mu'tamad, he was the first primary book of Tafsir, the most comprehensive book that first came out in Tafsir, subhanAllah. So everyone who came after, they depend on his book. Just like people depend on the book of Imam al-Bukhari for hadith. That's the main book of hadith. So likewise, people depend on the Tafsir of Imam al-Tabari, and the rest of the books on Tafsir all have to thank Imam al-Tabari rahimahullah because of his efforts in tafsir. And Ibn Kathir also wrote a book on Tarikh. What was his book on Tarikh? On history. Bidayah wa Nihaya, the beginning, from the beginning till the end, or the beginning and the end. So this book also, it said that he took from Imam al-Tabari. So subhanAllah, you see how Imam al-Tabari wrote 2 books, and he wrote many books. He wrote many other books. There's about 20-30 books which have been written and published, or they've been written from him definitely. But these 2 books are the most popular and the most known. Okay, his book in tafsir and his book in Islamic history. And in terms of which books are translated into the English language, I don't know of any of his books which have been translated. His tafsir, to my knowledge, it hasn't been translated as a whole. There may be some surahs or some ayat which are translated, okay, in book form or online. Has anybody come across any of his tafsir? Okay, so Allah Alam, but I haven't come across any of his tafsir which has been translated. I just saw, just before I came here, I saw an English, I think it was an English version of his Tarikh, of his history, Tarikh Al-Tabari. But I'm not sure if it was in English, Allahu Alam. It was on this website called Kitabun, which is a famous book, famous website, it's got sells lots of Islamic books. I think it was in English, but Allah knows best. I'm not sure how authentic it is and how well of a translation it is of his book. But it seems like you just have to learn Arabic, basically. So inshallah, learn Arabic. It's an incentive for you brothers to learn Arabic, and then you can benefit from the treasures of the scholars in the Arabic language. So inshallah, this is just a brief biography of Imam Al-Tabari and the efforts that he made and the things that he went through, in his life, and the immense efforts he made, just so we can now benefit from the tafsir of the Quran, which are all dependent on his book. Tafsir al-Tabari, Jami' al-Bayan fi ta'wil ayat al-Quran. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he adds this on the scale of good deeds for Imam al-Tabari and for the other scholars, and for myself and for all of you who inshallah have attended today and also will continue to attend inshallah ta'ala. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik ashhadu wa la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. If there's any questions, then I'll do my best to answer them inshallah. Yeah, so that does seem to be the case. Yeah, so if you look at his tafsir, the idea for his tafsir was for it to be a marji, a reference by the looks of it, because nobody had ever done anything like this. So he wanted it to be like a kind of encyclopedia of tafsir, of the science of tafsir. So everything related to that ayah he would just put in. That was his. It seems that was his intention. That was his purpose. And Allah knows best. I mean, the way they organized the tafsir, the way they write the tafsir, the manhaj in the way that they, list the tafsir of the ayat and how they do the tafsir of the ayat all differs. So for example, some scholars, they'll do tafsir of the ayat with just ayat. Some will, for example, do tafsir of the ayat of the Quran with ayat and also with hadith. And they won't mention sayings of the companions, for example. Or they won't mention the narrations of the tabi'een. So every single scholar, when they wrote their books of tafsir, they all have their own virtues. They all have their own merits. Okay, so they're all good, okay, and they all bring different benefits as well. So sometimes Imam Al-Tabari might have, things which he may not have mentioned with regards to fawaid and benefits, okay, and other scholars, they may mention benefits, okay, which were more suitable to their time, okay. So there's always some benefits in the books of tafsir, and maybe inshallah, in the future we can do the biographies of the other scholars of tafsir as well. I think maybe that would be good in the future, inshallah.
How often the tafsir is going to happen? Like, is it every Thursday or every?
Yeah, we do tafsir classes every Thursday. Yeah, so we just finished surah. Who knows? Surah Sharh, Surah Inshirah. We finished Surah Inshirah last week. So next week we're going to be doing Surah Al-Duha. وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى, inshallah, from next week. Bidhnahi ta'ala.
Sequence, like did you start from the first parah and then?
No, we started from the end. We started from Surah Nas. Yeah, Qul A'udhu Birabbin Nas. And then they're all available online, inshallah, if you want to watch them. But now we're on Surah Al-Duha, so we're going backwards because most people, they know the smaller surahs. So we wanted to start with the smaller surahs so that people were able to understand what they're reciting. Inshallah. Any more questions? جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم بحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.
الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. ألم تر إلى الذي حاج إبراهيم في ربه أن آتاه الله الملك إذ قال إبراهيم ربي الذي يحيي ويميت قال أنا أحيي وأميت قال إبراهيم فإن الله يأتي بالشمس من المشرق فأت بها من المغرب فبهت الذي كفر والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين. أو كالذي مر على قرية وهي خاوية على عروشها قال أنى يحيي هذه الله بعد موتها فأماته الله 100 عام ثم بعثه قال كم لبثت قال لبثت يوما أو بعض يوم قال بل لبثت 100 عام فانظر إلى طعامك وشرابك لم يتسنه وانظر إلى حمارك ولنجعلك آية للناس وانظر إلى العظام كيف ننشزها ثم نكسوها لحما فلما تبين له قال أعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير. وإذ قال إبراهيم رب أرني كيف تحيي الموتى قال أولم تؤمن قال بلى ولكن ليطمئن قلبي قال فخذ 4 من الطير فصرهن إليك ثم اجعل على كل جبل منهن جزءا ثم ادعهن يأتينك سعيا واعلم أن الله عزيز حكيم. مثل الذين ينفقون أموالهم في سبيل الله كمثل حبة أنبتت 7 سنابل في كل سنبلة 100 حبة والله يضاعف لمن يشاء والله واسع عليم. الذين ينفقون أموالهم في سبيل الله ثم لا يتبعون ما أنفقوا منا ولا أذى لهم أجرهم عند ربهم ولا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. قول معروف ومغفرة خير من صدقة يتبعها أذى والله غني حليم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تبطلوا صدقاتكم بالمن والأذى كالذي ينفق ماله رئاء الناس ولا يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فمثله كمثل صفوان عليه تراب فأصابه وابل فتركه صلدا لا يقدرون على شيء مما كسبوا والله لا يهدي القوم الكافرين ومثل الذين ينفقون أموالهم ابتغاء مرضات الله ومثل ينفقون أموالهم ابتغاء مرضات الله وتثبيتا من أنفسهم كمثل جنة بربوة أصابها وابل فآتت أكلها ضعفين فإن لم يصبها وابل فطل والله بما تعملون بصير أيود أحدكم أن تكون له جنة من نخيل وأعناب تجري من تحتها الأنهار له فيها من كل الثمرات وأصابه الكبر وله